name is John Kalura, and I'm at the University of Massachusetts in the Civil Engineering Department, and also been working with both Merrill and Paul on the Bay State Roads program. The session this morning, entitled Economics and Benefits of Pavement Management, will be handled by two representatives of MAPC, one of the regional planning groups around the Boston metropolitan area. The two representatives are Carol Blair on my far right, and in the middle is Birgit Hewlett. Carol's background is in both transportation planning and civil engineering, and Birgit's is in the area of environmental planning and economics. And what they're going to talk to you about is something that I've heard a great deal about regarding the whole subject of pavement management. And that is basically why we think it's important and why many local areas have been doing it in the last 2, 3, or 4 years. And on that note, what I'll do is I'll turn it over to both Birgit and Carol. They're going to talk to you for about 25, 30 minutes, which will then leave us with about 15 minutes for questions and comments. It's yours.
We may not even take that long. Are these graphics high enough so everyone can see them? These boards? I should have checked this earlier. Does this rise up? Do you know?
Thank you.
Is it too far away? Okay.
Fine.
No.
Good.
All right. A lot of you have probably seen a graph like this in your, well, even in the newspaper you may have seen a graph like this. It shows the investment over recent years since 1950 to 1984. This line shows the increase in traffic in the United States travel, and this line shows the investment in our road infrastructure. It's a dismal story, and one that we have heard this morning that we really need to correct. This is a graph that we did at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council that pertains to the Boston metropolitan area. This shows the total highway expenditures from 1978 to 1985 on locally maintained roads. And you can see that over that period of time, the amount of money invested in those roads for reconstruction and resurfacing and so forth has dropped. It's about half of what it was before Proposition 2.5. And you know, I'm sure you understand that even those who aren't from Massachusetts understand the reason for that. That is teachers' salaries and fire engines competing with local roads, maintenance of roads, and it's a little difficult for town meetings and finance committees sometimes to recognize the urgency of the roads, given that they can be postponed without teachers and fire engines being laid off. In Massachusetts, we see that the state has been fairly good about maintaining their share of the investment, but the communities just haven't been able to keep it up. Also, in Massachusetts, we see a special problem that, and this probably, I wouldn't be surprised if it was also replicated in other states, that the state aid tends to provide a disincentive to timely maintenance. That this is the curve that we see for. This is the standard deterioration curve for highways. Highway or pavement deteriorates fairly slowly at first and then deteriorates much faster. And unfortunately, the state aid in Massachusetts has reconstruction being 100% compensated from the state, and simple resurfacing and sealing treatments and so forth are not. I think, this is a better chart for this. Construction, reconstruction, repaving, you get 0% state aid. Construction, reconstruction, and paving for, it's a state primary system and other roads is 25%. Routine maintenance is 100% funded by the communities. So what that means is that communities are encouraged to wait until the road is in very poor condition so that they can get the aid, or to spend the aid that they do get on the roads that get 100% aid. So Massachusetts is a tough place to work. I'd be interested to hear during the question period what happens in other states. In our region, when we looked at local roads and how they relate to the other roads, 80% of the road mileage in the MABC region is locally maintained roads. Only 6.6 are state roads. The others are private roads and other authorities and so forth. So it's really a significant part of our road maintenance problem. Here's that standard deterioration curve again. You can see how the road deteriorates slowly. Here, a repair that would cost $1 here, if you wait not too much longer, costs $4 or $5. This is a 40% drop here in quality, another 40% drop with that great increase in the cost of repairing. That's, I guess it's sometimes for lay people, you can use this with your finance committee or your town meeting. It's like painting a clapboard house. If you don't paint the clapboard house, you end up replacing the clapboards, or maybe you end up even replacing the house, or paying your credit cards. If you don't pay your credit cards on time, then you end up paying the interest. That's the same thing we see here. We were able to model. Actually, we've been involved in this for several years. Our initial request came from the town of Wenham to help them out with pavement management, and so we did a study for the town of Wenham. Oh, at least we don't have that here. And that worked so well, they were able to take the findings of that study to their town meeting, and that we decided that we really should work with other communities to see if we could generate something generic that all communities could use. We got together a wonderful pavement management, sort of a task force. John Clore was part of that task force. Many of our communities were, and we had some other people from the State Department of Public Works and so forth. Helped us to develop this pavement management manual. And it goes through, what it does is to show highway superintendents how they can put on paper, in tables and in graphs, the information that they really already have in their heads and in their records, and make it vital for the town finance committees and so forth. It has some simple tables that they can use. They can just run out, drive the road, and they can do a windshield survey and get some very good information without very much effort. They can use that to work with the manual, fill in some tables, and get some stuff that really helps. It's much more effective than the highway superintendent standing up and saying, somebody's going to get killed, or whatever. Give them some tables, some graphs, some numbers that they can work with. After that study, though, we found that still communities weren't getting enough money. The state wasn't able to fill the gap, and the communities didn't have enough money. So we did two more studies that looked at the funding that was available, which is where that first curve came from that shows how funding has decreased. In the process of doing that, we developed a piece of software that that models the pavement deterioration process. It's very simplistic. It'd be easy for you to poke holes in it, but it also is very helpful in seeing what the outlook is. It makes some broad generalizations, but it helps you to get a ballpark idea of where the system is going in terms of deterioration and repair. What we did is to assume that every mile of roadway falls into one of four categories, either excellent, good, fair, or poor. And we describe these categories in fairly qualitative terms that any layperson could use. Then we also assume that there's a deterioration rate between that it would take so many years for a road to deteriorate from excellent to good. We generally assume 10 years, although we allow in the program that can be speeded up or slowed down. We assume 5 years for the road to go from good to fair, and 2 years to go from fair to poor. And again, that can be sped up or slowed down to reflect your local experience. We also assume that each road can be repaired from any of these conditions back to excellent. For good roads, it takes, we assumed 11,300 miles. That would be from repairing of cracks and sealing. For fair roads, we would specify rehabilitation at $86,000 a mile, and that assumes repair of the surface with an overlay probably. And for poor road, you would require reconstruction about $260,000 per mile. And you can change those numbers as well, the costs. Now, we looked at our road system in the MAPC region, and we took a sample of 10 communities. Many of these communities had done pavement management studies already, some by consultants and some done by the highway departments. And we found in our region that the excellent roads comprised 22% of the mileage. We had 34% in good condition, 25% in fair condition, and 19% in poor condition. So that was our starting point. Then we had to assume something about how those roads were being repaired, because of course it makes a big difference whether superintendents are using their investments to repair the best roads first, or if they're repairing the worst roads first, or if they're somewhere in between. We assumed they were somewhere in between, and arbitrarily what we said was, if we see that their roads are in this condition, if 30% of their roads are in excellent condition, then we're going to repair, let's see, we're going to put 30% of our work in that excellent category. I'm sorry, that's wrong. These roads get none. These percentages aren't calculated out. I'm sorry. I always have trouble with this. Let's see. If you calculate out the percentages here, you get a certain percent in good condition, a certain percent in fair condition, a certain percent in poor condition. So we're going to repair roads in the same proportions, whatever that comes out. So here we have the proportion of 3, 5, and 2. So that's what we assumed. Obviously, no superintendent is going to follow that sort of strategy. They have particular roads that they need to do, and particular roads that they can't afford to do. But as an average, that's what we assumed. We're going to repair the roads in the same category that we find them, in the same proportions as we find them. Then we had to, then what we did was to look at 3 outlooks, 3 funding outlooks for our region. Now, currently, it looks like we're spending about $26 million per year on all the locally maintained roads in the region. That means all of the towns plus the state money, total $26 million per year in our region. When we looked at the pavement management studies that had been done, they were estimating, when we melded them all together, $11,000 or $12,000 a mile for all the road miles in the particular town where it was done, or all the road miles that were studied. That comes to $113 million a year on the average. So we're saying if every town had done a pavement management study and they looked like those in the sample, that we would have seen a request for $113 million a year. Then we said if our idealistic scenario would be to bring all roads to excellent condition in 10 years, that would require $143 million. So we used these 3 different scenarios to see what the outlook would be for the roads in our region. And we got these curves. This is the $26 million curve. This shows what happens if we continue road funding at the current rate. And it shows the excellent curve is the blue curve. So the number of road miles that are excellent are decreasing. The fair curve is this light green curve, and so you see they're decreasing too. The dark curve is the poor roads, and you can see that they're beginning to take over after 10 years. So that's kind of a doomsday scenario, the current level of funding. The other 2 curves, of course, look much better. The idealistic curve with $143 million shows excellent roads continually increasing, and the others dropping out to 0. And the 113 is a more moderate, but still very nice looking set of curves. It shows the roads improving. The best news, though, is that when you look at the amount of money required for each of these, the $26 million scenario shows us spending $26 million forever, and we eventually have all 4 roads. I guess this is, at 30 years, 80% of the roads are poor condition. The $113 million scenario shows us spending $113 million per year for, let's see, 18 years. At that time, all the roads are excellent, and we can drop back to a maintenance program, which is only about $10 million a year. And $10 million is less than half of what we're spending now. So if somehow we can fund this prudent program of maintenance, then we look good. And of course, the 143 is the same, except we arrive at this maintenance program only 10 years. So we'll keep trying to sell that to the legislature. So actually, that was the point where we ended with one study, and then we were lucky enough to have a student from the Kennedy School of Government who was interested in following this on further, because of course this is very difficult to sell to the legislature. Everyone likes to see perfect roads, but our school systems and our fire systems and stuff weren't that close to perfect, so we have to let the roads get perfect before we fund them. So we're thinking a little bit more about how we actually fund this. Where do you find that kind of money? If you're going to increase the road budget by 5 or 6 times, where does it come from? So this, we had a student work on a study that looked at the different mechanisms that might be used, and I'm sure you've seen some of these things. He began by developing a catalog of all the different taxes and fees that are available, and he reviewed those using several different criteria. First is user equity. We want to tax the right. We want to make sure that the people using the systems, using the roads, pay for the roads. The second is income equity. We want to make sure that the wealthier people who can afford to pay more end up paying more. The third is administrative efficiency. We want to make sure that it's not such a cumbersome task or tax that you end up not earning very much from it. And the fourth is the real cost of use efficiency. Let's make sure that by taxing people, we don't encourage them to do the wrong thing. In other words, encourage them to drive more or take a long way around or some stupid thing like that. Okay. So obviously the first one he looked at was the gas tax. It's not obviously the first one, but it was one of the rich areas. He looks at the gas tax and he finds that the gas tax has very good user equity, is very efficient, and is lower than our neighbor's gas tax. Now, Secretary Salvucci has been reviewing this often. The gas tax in the New England states is higher everywhere than in Massachusetts, and it doesn't seem like we should allow that to continue for very long. So the gas tax looks like a good bet for us, as you can tell from the articles every day in the Globe now. And we looked at, actually, we were thinking about, too, the disincentives that the communities have been experiencing, and thought that we really need to have a state and local match to make sure that the state and the communities are both thinking very hard about the best way to spend the money. Both the state and the communities should be partners in this. And so we decided on a matching program, so that maybe the matching program we thought would be structured so that routine maintenance would get a better match than the reconstruction and so forth. That would counter that disincentive to wait until it was too late. The local share has a couple of options. At this point, communities are looking for a Proposition 2.5 override. It's very difficult to get. It requires a popular vote, and it just hasn't been easy for the communities to do that. Another option we suggested was an auto excise tax. Now, in Massachusetts, the auto excise tax is legislated by the state, but it's set at a different level for each community, and the state collects it. It goes back to the community. It's very cumbersome. In any case, there is the option for the state to set a limit. It's currently set at $25 per $1,000 of the car value. That could be raised, say, to $50 per $1,000 of the car value, and then the community could set whatever rate they wanted to in that range. And that would provide a local contribution to this new funding program, which is what this study recommended. So the total package then was a combination of state and local resources, the matching program, which provides the proper incentive for timely maintenance and offers commitment at the local level as well as the state level. And then local funds would come from either general appropriations, Proposition 2.5 overrides, or the new auto excise tax, and then the state tax. That would be the combined program. Now, some of this work has been done, the whole thing has been done over the course of 3 years. Birgit Euling has been working with communities over the last year to keep in touch, to get them introduced to the material, those who aren't yet, and try to bring them in, because it's hard. It's when communities need to be out picking up after hurricanes and patching potholes. So she just has a few tidbits about what communities are doing right now.
Outside. Like Carol said, I've been working with pavement management for about a year at MAPC, and I've talked to a lot of local officials and trying to give them suggestions of their program and introduce them to ours. In the past week in particular, I kind of touched base with as many as I could get a hold of. It's hard to get a hold of highway supervisors typically, to find out what was going on, if the situation was improving by any chance, which we did suspect. And most of our beliefs were true. As everyone knows, the problem's pretty bad, and funding problems are increasing. Everybody I talked to, either their budgets were level funded or they're decreasing. No one's budget is increasing, but everybody's roads are getting worse, which most people know about, but they kind of confirmed all our ideas. One community I talked to, they had reconstructed a road in 5 years, and the roads are terrible, and they're just doing maintenance and filling in their potholes, and they don't really know what to do with their money getting cut. So we're trying to work with them and find to improve their program. One of the other problems that we're finding is with the citizens and the highway superintendents who are working with their budgets and trying to make a program. They're hearing more complaints from the citizens. I talked to one of our communities who has gotten twice as many complaints in the past couple of years, and so they try to resolve the complaints that they hear about, but they're having a hard time improving the overall condition. So we're seeing that trend also increasing. We think that this is one area where we're trying to work on, where the interaction with the communities, the citizens, and the budget committees are important. And we've seen some of the pavement management programs that are doing better and are more successful in the communities are those where the communities are better informed of it. We have, I spoke to some local officials in 2 neighboring communities, and in the first community, it's a little bit more urban, it's a little bit older, and their maintenance program isn't that sophisticated. They're having a hard time with their funding. They rely completely on Chapter 90 money, and it's just maintenance, and they're barely getting by, and they really are looking for some solutions, and their roads are terrible. And in their neighboring community, it's a little bit younger, and they were fortunate enough to have a highway superintendent 10 years ago who looked ahead and got a 10-year plan going. And their program has been more successful. He could survive with just a maintenance program, but the citizens are responsible, he said, and they support the community in their road maintenance program, so they've gotten their budget approved, and consequently their roads are in a better condition. So we kind of see, even those communities are neighboring, really indicates to us that if you work together with the communities and the budget committee with the highway superintendents, I think that's one area where we see in our region that we can really work on to try to improve the problem, and that's what we're trying to do with some workshops in the future. So that's how we see things.
Really, the most important thing is showing the community that graph that shows that the roads can go this way or they can go this way. You can show the finance committee that graph, it seems to be that you've got much more funding to work with. And basically, I think the highway superintendent knows how to spend the money if he can get it. It's a matter of demonstrating the need in a way to compete with other finance needs.
Great, thank you. Let me just echo one thought that both Carol and Bergen expressed, and that is the importance of A, working with the local highway superintendents, and B, the role that the whole pavement management concept can play when you're trying to improve communication with those in the town that are key decision makers, especially those on finance committees, on city councils, on boards of selectmen, because those are the ones who have to be convinced often that what you claim to be the problem is severe enough so that they ought to approve funds for your use. And again, given the budgetary problems that I know we've had here in Massachusetts, and I know others in the Northeast are experiencing, that's a very difficult chore at times, trying to get more money and in fact trying to keep level funding. Before we open it up to questions and comments, I thought it might be useful, not just for us, but for you to know essentially how the group here is made up. I assume that most here are locals. How many here are from local governments, cities or towns in New England? Okay, the majority. How many are from regional planning agencies? Okay, almost as many. Okay. How many are from Massachusetts? Okay. A third or a half, and the rest are from the other 5 states. Okay, and I realize, and I'm sure Carol and Birgit do, that local funding, policy matters, fiscal situations differ, and can, not only from state to state, but from community to community within the same state. Okay, at this point, why don't we open it up to questions and comments, and let you tell us something a little bit about what you've been doing with pavement management, or perhaps pose a question to us, and one perhaps that we can throw back out to the group. Anybody wants to start the discussion? Go ahead.
My name is Luke Chang. I'm working with Nashville Regional Planning Commission. And when I was in school, I've been involved in some pavement life cycle analysis. So I totally agree with what you just present now, and maybe I'll suggest that we can go one step further. That is to sort of emphasis on not just lack of funding would do to deteriorate the road condition, and also one step further is what the better road would do to users. That's to emphasis on user cost concept. So in another word, you can quantify the complaints of the citizens. And I've done some work in finding the relationship between user cost and pavement condition. User costs include accident costs, vehicle maintenance costs, vehicle operating costs, like tire wearing and losing bumper or muffler and those things. And I know there's some information and some work being done in that field.
The data in that area has not been very good. If you have new data, we'd be interested in seeing. Do you have some costs, user costs?
I'm going to dig through my shelves of boxes. Those 1985 or 86. I'll try to recall something. If I find anything, I'll send you contact.
Thank you.
Two questions for Carol. Where can we get the pavement management handbook?
The Bay State Roads Program has this the handbook, and actually there are two pieces. There's the pavement management manual, which tells you about how to inventory the roads, and gives you some background, some training materials, and some forms and so forth. And then there's also a piece of software which does this programming to show the outlook over the years with the different assumptions about your road conditions and so forth. You can buy from the Bay State Roads Program or from MAPC the documentation for the software and the cassette program. And just so that you all will know, we'll have the name written down there, copies or flyer here. If anybody needs action about something here.
If the other, just in response to that, if anybody here would like a copy of the MAPC manual, leave me your card, and I'll make sure that they get to Merrill and she'll mail you.
Great.
The other question is, one of the things that I've experienced is justification of the curve. Everybody says, oh yeah, that's great, but where did it come from? What's it based on? And although I've seen that same curve or one very similar in a lot of places, nobody says how they arrived at that 40% loss over 75% of the time and 40% more over 17% of the time. So where's the documentation for that curve so that we can justify it?
I've personally seen one curve that was documented by data and it didn't look like that. How about you?
Well, my response is that the curve at this point, at a minimum, is a concept. It helps those who are giving presentations to boards, lay people out, a better understanding of pavement performance and why we should maintain our roads on a regular basis, just like we maintain every other physical facility in town. I think Carol presented a couple of good analogies. Everybody here, or many of you here, have driveways, right? Some of which are paved, and you know that if you let it go too long, you're going to end up rebuilding, right? Rather than if you took care of it, similar to the way in which Carol made the point that you take care of other physical facilities, then you're going to be better off. I think this gentleman has made a good point. We, today, as technocrats, as engineering types, as analysts, don't have real good deterioration curves. As you may know, some of you, there's a so-called SHARP program in process down in Washington where they're spending millions of dollars a year studying various aspects of pavement performance with the hope that in a short time, on the order of 3, 4, 5 years, we will have better curves so that you can support the dollar values that you've seen. Now, my response to your specific question on where those numbers came from, as I recall, was from a presentation pulled together by Federal Highway Administration, and that's the original reference. Now, I know that there are 2 or 3 people here from Federal Highway who might care to respond to that, but that's my recollection. And again, let me close by saying that the curve is a concept. It helps us better explain to lay people, A, that pavements deteriorate over time. We're not sure precisely how, and if you took a survey among you experts out there who have seen your own pavements deteriorate, some would tell us that a new overlay of 1.5 inches will last 10 years, provided the proper preparation is done prior to the overlay being applied. And others will say 6, and others will say 12. That's based on your experience, and that's why it's so hard to specifically say how that curve is shaped and whether it's $4 or $3 or $2.75 and so on. I think that's a very good point, and one that you should be prepared to deal with when that question comes up, and that is, where did you get those numbers?
There's another thing I'd like to say too on that. It's very good to be thinking the way you are thinking, because if you do adopt a piece of software or whatever, and there are many pieces of software out, and some of them look very fancy, you can be buying something that doesn't have a lot of data in there. I mean, it may be that the program depends on data that you will provide, and you should know that. Or maybe it has default data, and you should be able to check that data and see whether it reflects your own experience.
More of my question specifically was, is it a national average? Was it a local area number,
Yeah.
or Massachusetts specific, New England states with a freeze-thaw cycle type thing? Because it would make a big difference if it was a national...
Absolutely. And in fact, if you developed a curve like that with data from New England, I would say you'd want to use data from a particular state, in fact, even a region. You know, the way in which roadways deteriorate, 2-lane roadways, say on Cape Cod, will be different than the way they deteriorate out on the Mohawk Trail. And we recognize that, and that's why it's so hard to really present a lot of empirical evidence. Again, it's a concept, and it puts things in perspective when you have to give your first or your second public presentation. I must admit, I have a 13-year-old boy who I tried to convince with the use of the performance curve why he should regularly go to the dentist and have his teeth fixed. You can see the analogy. It wasn't convincing, I might add, but at any rate, that's basically why we do pavement management, try to collect as much data on a regular basis so that when you go back and give the next presentation, you might even have some data so that you can say, well, you remember the last time we spoke, this was the condition of the roadway system. We haven't done a great deal since then. Here's what it's like now. There's another question. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, based on those proposals for increases in gasoline tax and excise tax, do you have any kind of revenue projections on that? What kind of money that would generate towards your different proposals for
Yeah, I think we were looking statewide at the order of $300 million.
So there would more than come up with the money you need for that
Well, that's
13 million.
going backwards. We were saying in the MAPC region we need $140 million.
I see.
Therefore, at the state we need on the order, I think it was 395 actually. And maybe I even have the numbers here. I
Is the
think
gas
that
tax used exclusively for roads, or is it put in the general fund?
In
a 4-cent gas tax, we were talking about $97 million. Current expenditures of these are statewide estimates now. Current expenditures of $95 million, increase of gas tax 4 cents gives you $97 million, an increase in the auto excise tax gives you 105, so the total was $297 million. That was the proposal.
And does that somewhere equal the intangible benefits the gentleman from New Hampshire mentioned about decreased wear and gas mileage in the state? So it's a selling point that you're getting something.
Right, we haven't calculated those user costs and benefits. Yes, they would be a selling point,
And
yes.
I just have, I guess, one further suggestion. In a lot of areas, the increased gas tax is perceived as a deficit reduction move by the legislature. And a thought that may eliminate that from people's minds when considering it is a clause to dedicate the taxes to the areas within where they are collected. So gas tax, say, collected in Berkshire County, stays in Berkshire County, or whatever, so that there's more local support for that type of an
That's
action.
a thought. So far, I guess the dedications are not very specific. I know yesterday I heard Commissioner Garvey and Secretary Salvucci both speak separately on the gas tax, and it was clearly stated, well, I think it was understood, given that the focus of the forum was on the central artery, that we need the gas tax because the central artery is going to be in big trouble if we don't have the gas tax. On the other hand, that was not stated. The stated reason was that we need to repair all these bridges for the safety of the state. And therefore, I asked the question, we gave a brief statement on local roads and said, how about local aid? Will we have any local aid in that gas tax? And the answer was, of course, there's been increasing local aid recently, and we would expect that there would be increasing local aid continuing. But I don't know that anyone has sat down and said, the governor says 6 cents, that means 1 cent goes to the central artery and 2 cents go to communities. And ½ cent goes to...
The way I saw it presented at the Mass Highway Association this winter, it was the good news and the bad news. The roads are in terrible shape, but we're going to build a central artery. Isn't that wonderful? And that's where the idea developed for dedicating the funds, at least for the increased gas tax, to the localities to prevent an offset of these funds towards the central artery.
And I think probably this is the best lobbying group there is. If we expect anyone to be running the legislators, it probably ought to be this group.
I think that the equity issue is an interesting one. It's multifaceted, and it means many things to many people. Carol made reference to it in terms of income, I saw on one of the visuals. And I think what we're saying there is that, you know, if you're earning more, or if you're wealthier, then you may pay a proportionally higher share, okay? I've heard the gas tax discussed as a regressive tax, in the sense that, you know, if you pay at the pumps, regardless of what your income is, you pay the same rate, unless some adjustment, of course, is made clearly and consciously on your income tax return. But in terms of geographic equity, that is, if it's collected in Berkshire County, it stays there, that's a whole other issue which may not be related directly to income or other aspects of equity. I've also heard, and this may be true in other states, as it is in Massachusetts, that locals are concerned that if in fact there is an increase in the gas tax and we generate more revenue, where are the funds going? And I think there are some doubting Thomases out there at the local level, in at least Massachusetts, who are saying, we won't get it. And whether that's true or not, the fact is that the locals have to be convinced that they will get their, quote, fair share, unquote. However, that's
Or what the people live within the locality pay to the funds.
Yeah.
Or at least a rough parity.
some kind of parity, sure. Another question. Sorry, hand up over here. Go ahead.
On the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, how many communities have done pavement management? And of those, I would be interested to know the ratio of what how many communities used a consultant versus how many did the survey themselves, and whether you have any kind of a feeling on that.
First, I want to say that I think all communities are doing pavement management. I think that some are doing it with one man in his head.
Oh, yeah.
But every community is doing pavement management, and I think what we're trying to do is help them get a little bit more formalized about it. Because in doing that, they're going to be able to communicate better with the people who are allocating the funds to do it. And any superintendent is not, no matter how brilliant or how well he knows his roads, he's just not going to do very well if he's not given the budget. So that's really the core of the issue that we're looking at. I guess the work that I've done, maybe Birgit can make a short comment about what she's seen recently about the communities particularly.
I've found in the communities that I've dealt with that there's really a wide range. I haven't talked to that many communities who have used consultants, I think, and we're working actually on updating that kind of data for the region. We don't have those current statistics, but my impression has been that overall it's the departments have their internal inventories and they haven't used consultants, but they're considering them, and most of them are beginning to get computerized and trying to expand, and money's a problem. I think they're looking ahead carefully. That's the impression that I've gotten, but there is, like Carol said, a wide range of how sophisticated their systems are.
I think a good question to pose here is how many in the room have been directly involved with pavement management in that you've carried out a study internally or you've hired a consultant? Okay. Well, I think that there's a fair number out there who haven't, and I think what both Carol and Birgit are saying and what others are going to say today at other sessions will be extremely, extremely useful. Go ahead.
Can you expand that question to of the number of communities who have done pavement management? How many did it in-house and how many did it?
How many have done pavement management? Get up your hands again. Okay, we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, say 15. Okay, well, leave the hands up. Those who have done pavement management studies. Those who have done them. Okay. Now, how many have hired consultants? Leave your hands up. Okay. Small.
Okay, that's going on. I was going to editorialize my question.
Go ahead.
In town meeting experiences, finance committee meeting experiences, the definition of a consultant is someone you don't know. So your local highway superintendent is the guy who's trying to build an empire. He's the guy who wants more trucks, more men, better roads, and he's perceived in that light by his electorate. And my own personal feeling is he'll have better success farming out his pavement management because he can bring the consultant to town meeting and put him at the mic.
Okay. And you've experienced this?
Yeah.
Are you at the local level?
Yeah, I'm with the town of Sandwich.
Town of Sandwich. Okay, and you can treat that as a candid comment. He's not a consultant.
Right.
Thank you.
But that data you generate yourself, although you know your roads better than anybody else.
This is not the first time I've heard that comment, and of course it isn't related to just pavement management. It has to do with any local public program.
Yeah.
And oftentimes the official in the community will go out and hire someone externally so that they're viewed as a more objective individual and also as an expert, right? Because what does the local public official know?
There is that.
Well,
but there's
I'm sure you've run into that.
Yeah. But now, for example, you might have a section of roadway that you know you might have constructed as a superintendent 10 years ago.
Sure.
And your pavement management consultant would say that it's allocated and you know the traffic volumes on that road and heavy truck traffic have provided you with that condition and that it's not the result of just, that there's more to it than that. But you can make those specific recommendations within your program, but that generating it, there is some danger in generating it yourself.
Those are, I think, very good comments. And the flip side of those is the following, at least from my experience, maybe Birgit and Carol would like to add to this, is that some locals, while they might perceive that, don't have the money to hire a consultant.
There's
The
more
dilemma.
too. It seems
Go ahead.
that Mr. Ellis is very familiar with the characteristics of the road and can supplement the consultant with better information, more solid technical information. I think the opposite happens in some cases, that the town being totally um, just in over their heads with pavement problems, says to the consultant, you know, we have this pot of money, would you please solve all our problems, like the Wizard of Oz? And the consultant may come with a software program with lots of bells and whistles, and they do complete inventory, and then they walk away a year later, and then the town doesn't know what to do with it. I mean, they have a good program for the first year, and the town probably funds it very nicely because they see all this stuff, but then a couple years later, the program needs to be updated. And obviously, things haven't gone exactly as they would have perceived, and the town doesn't know how to do that, and they aren't prepared to fund another consultant study either. So if there is a work with a consultant, it really needs to be a partnership. Make sure that the people in the town know how to do the inventory, to do the follow-up, to update what's been done by the consultant.
And I think in addition, it's very important, and this reflects what Pat was saying, the local highway superintendent has to follow through with the pavement management study. Just like any other study, it's going to end up in the shelf. We've had a couple of encounters where the local highway superintendent happened to leave during or right after the pavement management study. You might as well not have spent the money to do the study. Or what happened was the local highway superintendent was still in the community, but did not see that pavement management system as a crucial element. Now you might ask, well, why was it developed? The fact is that, and we recognize this among many locals, is you are expected to put out brush fires every day and work on a number of other things that don't allow you to do everything that you feel you want to do. And as a result, some things get put aside. It happens to RPA people, it happens to college professors, it happens to all of us. It's human nature, right? And those are the pressures that you get, and we recognize that oftentimes you can't do it, although you recognize that it's very important. There's another hand up. Go ahead, Fred.
I'm Fred Orlowski with the Federal Highway Administration out of our regional office in Albany, New York. I'd like to just comment on a few things we've heard discussed here. First one is the shape of that curve. I'm not real positive, but I think that might have came from AASHTO road tests done back in the 60s. I could verify that if anybody really wants to know, but that was a national study done back then to look at different pavement designs, deterioration rates under various loading conditions. And that data probably was available to make that curve. And that's why it's a national curve, and you don't really see definite numbers or time periods really assigned, and everybody varies that to their own needs. As far as why there isn't more defined data available for that curve, nobody has really been collecting that data for 30 years, like the curve says, or even 20 years. That wasn't our major concern 10, 15 years ago, was pavement management, overlays, and before our program. We did not have that. We were still in the construction program. But since then, in the late 70s, early 80s, we are collecting some of that data. And most states, I would say, have maybe 10 years of data for that curve already. And we're promoting that more through our recent pavement policy for each state to have a pavement management system, and also some of the highway statistics data we're collecting as data for your state that would, I'm sure, give you 10 years of data either by functional class within your state or statewide. The second point I'd like to just comment on was the local agency involvement in pavement management systems. Some of the regional planning agencies like the MAPC here are getting involved in pavement management either on their own or through use of consultants. That's an activity that Federal Highways is supporting. Some of the RPAs in Massachusetts are doing that. We are funding that as an eligible activity, and that will continue. So that's one source of, I guess, information for a local agency to go to, one agency to go to help them out in starting a system, pavement management system. Your other source is your T-squared centers that each state has, and and each center has a manual that was developed by Federal Highway Administration a few years ago that goes through the whole pavement management process and gives them some idea what to collect, how to collect it, and so forth. That manual is currently being updated today. I don't know if any of the center directors are aware of that, but that manual is being updated, and it's about to come out, another version in June or July of this year. There'll be training sessions held on that for the centers, and later this year an update to that manual will be available. So that's a more current source of information for your centers. So if a community is looking to set up a system, there is two sources of information they can go to before they want to go to consultant if they choose. Your T-squared centers and your regional planning agencies or RPAs or metropolitan planning agencies, whatever they're called.
That update might have good current costs.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say something about the curve. I'm from Burlington, Vermont, and also this is interesting between consultants versus having your own program in-house. Like about 5 years ago, we had a consultant do a pavement index survey, and then we bought a program in the past year or so, did a survey, and put curves together, trying to correlate the information. And they do pan out to be like all the curves that you see. So it did make sense. I mean, it was only 5 years worth of information. But the whole concept of consultant versus in-house, I really think that you should have an in-house program, because you need to be able to update it. You get that consultant's report, and it sits on the shelf. And that way you can each year put more information in and start developing your own curves.
Thank you.
John, I was just gonna, basically, as Fred said, that most of these communities can go to the local regional planning agencies to get some technical advice on how to set up some of these programs and what's available. Ourselves from the Old Colony Planning Council, we just purchased a program that was developed in San Francisco. It's called the Bay Area Pavement Management Program, which we're going to try out in one of our communities as a demonstration program. So like you said, I think the regional planning agencies are really getting into this kind of heavy on it. And the other thing I'd like to point out, Carol's chart there on the cost, I think one thing that's lacking on that is the existing condition, to maintain the existing condition, just to show that. Because I've used the model for one of our community just to show, he came up to me and said, what would it cost to maintain the existing condition? This individual community was receiving like $90,000 a year for payment, to do all the work on the payment. That's excluding state money. And as I was going through it, in order for him to maintain the existing condition, he would have to get like $325,000 a year for the next 10 years, just to maintain it. So I think that might be a viable option to show on the graph.
Thank you. I think because of the time, we're going to have to terminate the discussion. I know that some of you still have some questions. I saw some hands. Let me indicate to you that there are some other sessions this afternoon, one at 1:15, which I'll be involved, where we'll be picking up basically where we're leaving off now and talking more specifically about distress surveys and treatment selection processes, which were some of the phases of Carol's presentation this morning, and relate to what Birgit was mentioning in terms of her work with locals here in Massachusetts. Let me thank our cameraman, Hank Lambert, who I think many of you know from Vermont. Again, I'd like to thank our speakers from MAPC for the time and effort on their part. We know that they're very busy and that they took time out of their schedule so that they could come out and enlighten and inform us this morning. Again, thanks for coming, and maybe we'll see you at another session.
Are you looking into having a study done?
Well, right now, I'm in the process of making a decision on whether to do it.
One thing
I know we're going to do most of the work.
And initially, I just did it on a street.
Yeah, I guess it was a couple of years ago.
But if you can get that land base such that it's going to do the job for all the departments and in the future, that those two questions greatly affect the cost of building your system, scale and accuracy. And the final statement is, somewhat along the lines of the other speakers, that I think it is time to start doing things about this, but I think it's important to get help to do it. That I see somewhat of a mentality in a number of the people from different communities. They're going to do this thing themselves. And I try to liken it to a wastewater treatment plant. You know, if everybody in a community decided that needs a wastewater treatment plant, we're going to go out, we're going to learn how to design a wastewater treatment plant. Then we won't have to hire anybody to tell us how to do that. We'll be a lot more knowledgeable about it. We can design our own wastewater treatment plant. Well, that's not going to work. People have